Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Hi there, and welcome to the bonus episode from the launch of the Embrace podcast. My name is Kelsey, and I'm actually the founder of Embrace. And as I was thinking of, how to start us off, I just felt like it was appropriate and almost necessary for me to share my story. I kind of mentioned in the introduction that I have some educational and professional experience in the mental health field. But truly what I feel like has been the most foundational for me has been my own journey with mental health. And I really feel like to explain the heart and soul of what Embrace is and what I hope it can be, it just felt like I needed to share my story. So when I think about what my predominant mental health struggle has been, it's been a struggle with anxiety. And when I kind of try to think of what my relationship with anxiety has looked like throughout my life, there's been times where it just has felt like a tag-along kid sister. Like it's kind of annoying, a little bit more of a nuisance than anything, but you just kind of deal with it. There's been times where my anxiety has kind of felt like a birthmark, like something I was just born with and didn't really ask for, but, just kind of try to keep covered up. There's been times where my anxiety felt like an issue I dealt with in the past. It doesn't really come up anymore. That was from back then. I'm fine now. And then there have been times in my life where anxiety has been choking the life out of me. When I think about my childhood, I really had a pretty idyllic childhood, to be honest. I had great parents. I went to a good school. I lived in a nice neighborhood. I had great friends and family and a good support system. But there was this reality of which there was still always this anxiety that was kind of lurking in my shadow. And a lot of my growing up experience, my anxiety just had a lot of ebbs and flows. There were some points where it would flare up and it would get pretty bad, and I would be pretty miserable and not functioning particularly well. And then there were times where I just didn't even notice it. I felt totally fine, totally normal. But a lot of my experience with anxiety was predominantly physical, or at least that was the part that I was able to kind of recognize. And mostly what it kind of ended up looking like was a lot of upset stomach. I was kind of known as the Tums girl. I always had a bottle of Tums with me. Had been diagnosed with acid reflux, which I do have, but I think I probably have it because of anxiety. But it was easier for me to say, yep, I have acid reflux than it was for me to say that I have anxiety. I just didn't have that word for it. And that was kind of true up until college. The summer before I started college, I actually had my first panic attack. And it was like a lot of other people's experience where initially I was kind of like, oh man, like my chest hurts and I'm short of breath. Like, do I have heart problems? Like, what's going on? And then somehow kind of figured out, like, I think that was a panic attack. That's kind of weird. And that was not fun. Like, what was that? And that was kind of the first time that I started to have like the vocabulary of anxiety or panic or, some of those kinds of things to put to my experience. In college was a little bit of, more of the same, of where there was a lot of ebbs and flows with it. Again, some points where it was pretty bad and I was pretty miserable. And then some other points where like I didn't really notice it. I felt fine and was, functioning just fine. And at that point, I think I had just kind of resigned myself to that being my experience. Like I wasn't really afraid to tell people that I had anxiety. I didn't really keep it a secret. But at the same time, it just was kind of like, well, it's something in my life that I'll just have to deal with. But it felt manageable. It felt like I knew how to handle it well enough. And so I kind of was just content, complacent with that being what my life was. And it wasn't until after college that I realized that that was just not going to work for me. Um, After college, after I finished up grad school, in my first job out of college, I had developed an ovarian cyst. And it was kind of one of those things where, I was experiencing these symptoms and I just kind of kept saying, it'll go away. It'll just go away. And then not only did it not go away, but it just kind of kept getting worse. And it got to a point where I realized, like, I can't just ignore this. I'm going to need to go to a doctor. And at that point, I basically lost all control of my life and my mental health in a lot of ways. I knew that if I went to the doctor, there were these certain procedures and tests that they were going to want to do. And I could not do that. Um, for whatever reason, that was not something I could do. And I was trying to gear myself up to be able to handle it. And like I said, I just lost all control. I got stuck in this rock and a hard place where I was terrified of what was happening to me physically, but was also terrified of going to the doctor and doing anything about it, and just got stuck. And my life became hell. I stopped functioning. I couldn't eat. I lost like 30 pounds, like 2 or 3 weeks. I wasn't sleeping. I was like having hallucinations when I was trying to fall asleep. And I was just so anxious that I couldn't calm down enough to fall asleep. And the more I didn't sleep, the more anxious I got. And it was like this vicious cycle. And I remember like fighting for just, a couple hours of sleep here and there. And I would wake up in the morning and I would stand up and just physically feel anxiety just filling my body, like starting at the top of my head and feeling it just trickle down all the way through my legs. And that was my existence. My existence was anxiety. And it was torturous. Like, it was horrible. And I remember one time, I just went and I looked in the mirror and I just didn't recognize myself. I didn't see myself. I just saw anxiety. And I came out of the bathroom and I was crying and my mom was like, what happened? What happened? And all I could say was, I can't make it stop. I just can't make it stop. I couldn't make my anxiety stop. I couldn't make my body heal itself. And I couldn't make any of it stop. And it was horrible. So, anxiety had kind of gone from this thing that was not fun, but manageable, to all of a sudden, I was confronting my anxiety face to face and it had become life threatening. I mean, there was a physical piece of where I was not physically healthy. Like I said, I wasn't eating or sleeping, and that was not going to lead anywhere good. But on top of that, I reached a point where I was so miserable and so helpless and had just lost all control of my anxiety. And I wanted to die. Um, I remember just laying in bed, trying to fall asleep, with this elephant of anxiety just sitting on my chest and praying, just praying like, God, if this is life, like, I'm not interested. I can't do this. If you could just like let me go in a car accident, figure out something quick and easy. Like, I do not want to live anymore. I want to die. And that was the worst feeling that I have ever experienced in my life. I've experienced some pretty bad anxiety. I'm a big feeler. Like, I feel things hard. I've been angry. I've been sad. I've grieved. I've had some losses, and like a lot of those feelings were not fun. But the worst feeling that I have ever had in my life was wanting to die. I hated wanting to die. And to be honest, it was something that also haunted me. Up until that point, I thought I knew what my anxiety was capable of. I had no idea I was capable of that. And learning that that capability existed within me, just, it haunted me. Um, I didn't really know what to do with that. I didn't know how to, again, I didn't know how to make it stop. And even as I like started to get better, I still had that fear because all of a sudden I did not feel safe within my own self. My own mind, my own self just did not feel safe. And it was super unsettling. Um, so a little bit of a long story short, I did end up going to the doctor, but I told them before I can address anything else, like, you've got to help me figure out this anxiety because I am not functioning. And they were like, yeah, your heart rate is through the roof. Like, what is going on? So, thankfully I had a doctor at that point who was willing to kind of work within my parameters. And I started on birth control and I also started on Prozac and Xanax. And up until that point, I had never thought medication was something I would ever need. And at that point, I was desperate. I was like, do anything that can help change this even a little bit because I wanted to die and I needed something to get me out of that spot. Um, so the symptoms, both the physical and the mental health, type symptoms started to subside. It got better, but I still, again, because I had experienced what I had experienced and was afraid of what existed within my own self, I still wasn't really back at ease. Um, and then I think it was like 6 months or so after that, after I had kind of gotten to the point that I was at least functioning again. My best friend, Brittany, she went to the gynecologist and she came back and we went to lunch afterwards and she was just like sort of telling me about it. And I realized like I was having this trauma response to it. I was triggered by it. I was experiencing anxiety and discomfort. And I kind of looked at her and I was like, I feel like I'm having a harder time with this than you are. And she was like, yeah, that's kind of weird. And I was like, yeah, it is kind of weird, huh? And the more I sat there and kind of thought about it, I was kind of like, why am I having a harder time with this than even she is? Like, this is more than just empathy. This is more than me sharing her discomfort. Like, this was something that was entirely had to do with me. And so I asked myself, okay, why am I having a hard time with this? And I remember Brittany and I were sitting in our living room. We were roommates at the time. And I looked to her, and for the first time, I said out loud, I think I experienced sexual abuse as a child. And it was something I had always known had happened to me. It wasn't something that I had like blocked out, but at the same time, I didn't talk about it and I never called it what it was. And part of that was because it wasn't your stereotypical child abuse. It wasn't something that happened over and over again. It wasn't something that happened like with a family member or, some of the more things that you think of when you think of child sexual abuse. But I was molested by another child at a daycare and then had another sexually traumatic experience at the doctor a few years later. And honestly, even that one, I still don't really know exactly what to call it because I don't know if I can count it as abuse, but I do know that it was deeply traumatic for me. So anyway, so I was sitting there with Brittany and, said, I think I experienced sexual abuse as a child, but I don't know if it counts. And I don't know how I could be more thankful for Brittany than how she responded in that instance. Because she looked at me and she said, of course that counts. And I don't know how to explain how important that was to have somebody who had the right thing to say to me in that moment. Because there could have been somebody who had said, no, I don't really think that counts. Or you're making too big of a deal out of it. Or I don't even ambiguity, I don't think would have been helpful for me. But to have somebody not only be a safe place for me to say those words out loud for the first time, but to affirm it right away. There's a piece of me that understands that Brittany might have saved my life that day. And so, moving on from that period, all of a sudden, my life started to kind of make sense. A lot of things clicked for me. um, I realized like, oh, my anxiety didn't just form in this vacuum, like it stemmed from something. And to have the piece of trauma that it stemmed from was a huge thing for me. Like I was like, oh, this is why I hate the doctor. Oh, this is why I have so much health anxiety. This is why some of my relationships have been a struggle. It's just so much all of a sudden made sense. Um, but even within having the root of it or the like start of it, being aware of that was important for me, but I still don't really know what to do about it. I knew where the wound had come from, but I still didn't really know how to heal it. And so, for several years after that, I felt slightly empowered because I understood why I was experiencing what I was experiencing, which is helpful. But I still wasn't free from it because I didn't know what to do about it. Um, and there were some points in there where my anxiety got really bad again. Um, Not quite as bad as it had gotten when I had the cyst, but it's still like it reached a peak at points that, that little creeping of, I think I might want to die again, like would start to come up of like, if this is my life, like, this is a miserable life. This is not what I want. This is not something that I want to have to like feel for years and years and years on end. Like it just was. And even if I wasn't experiencing at that point, I was always afraid that I was going to feel that way. And I remember just trying to read every book I could get my hands on or searching the internet, Googling for hours, just trying to find anyone who would tell me I was there, but I overcame my anxiety, or I overcame this fear, or I defeated this phobia. Anybody who would tell me that. I just needed somebody to tell me that it was possible, that it was even on the table, because I didn't know. I didn't know if it was possible. And I would find some websites here and there, that would say like therapy is effective for treating anxiety, or medication can help with phobias, but like I never felt like I found that personal story. I needed a personal story. I needed somebody who had done it so that I knew that it was even possible. And, I didn't really find that for a long time. So I just kind of suffered through it a little bit. And then COVID happened. And I know for most people, COVID was like one of the worst things that's ever happened. And understandably, like COVID sucked. That was not a good time for anybody. Um, but there are a lot of ways in which COVID was the absolute best thing that's ever happened to me. Um, so as you can imagine, like I said, one of my biggest triggers has been health anxiety. And so COVID and health anxiety like it was not fun. And my anxiety was getting higher and higher. And by like June of 2020, I was working pretty hard to convince myself that I did not have colon cancer. And I decided like I'm getting to that point again, and I need to find a therapist. And so I started seeing my current therapist. Her name is Amy. And to be honest with you, Amy was not the first therapist I've seen. She's actually the sixth therapist that I've seen. And it wasn't so much that the other five were bad. I would say of those other five, two of them were not good fits for me. But the other three, like, they definitely helped me. But at that time that I was seeing them, I didn't really have all the puzzle pieces. I had not said out loud that I had experienced sexual abuse. So Amy was really the first therapist that I had all the pieces to bring. And so I started therapy. And the reason that it being COVID was so important was because I had all kinds of time on my hands, to be honest with you. Um, my job was pretty scarce at that point. I wasn't getting a ton of hours. And so I had just time to work through my crap. Um, And, like I would start each day with like a 30-minute relaxation exercise. And then I would go to a park and I would sit in a park for an hour, hour and a half and just work on my mental health, kind of identifying some of my negative thought patterns or my mistaken beliefs, refuting them, finding affirmations to put in their place. And I wrote this list of, I don't know, probably like 15 to 20 affirmations. And I just repeated them to myself every single day. And I had a recording of them. I listened to that every single day and just started doing the work of healing. And I finally had somebody who was able to kind of guide me into what that looked like. And, one of the biggest testaments for that time for me, one of my biggest phobias was needles. Anytime that first of all, doctors, I hated doctors. And second of all, any time that I didn't feel basically in total control of my body, it was a trigger for me. And so needles had been an issue for me for as long as I could remember. And so, but I knew I was at a point that I needed to get the vaccine. And so I had all this time to work through and to slowly expose myself to that. And I ended up getting a vaccine. And this is going to horrify some people, but I hadn't had a vaccine since kindergarten. And so I can't explain. It was like something broke in me that day, but broke in a good way, of all of a sudden this thing that my entire life I didn't think was at all possible for me to do, to overcome. I did it. And that piece of me that was so afraid of wanting to die again, kind of a thing, it broke, because one of the biggest stipulations to that was I can't overcome these fears that I have. I'm just stuck in them. And so for me to actually overcome a fear and to do something that I didn't think I was capable of doing, all of a sudden I was filled with this feeling of freedom. If I did this once, I can do it again. I can do something that I never thought was possible. And my life it changed after that. Some of those times when I was in those dark places where I was just riddled with anxiety and just honestly miserable and just suffering, I did a lot of praying. And I felt like there were two things that I kept hearing. One of them was that you are an overcomer. And the other one was that I am going to use your pain to help other people. And to be honest, in those times, I was like, I'm not really asking for that. I'm not interested in that. Just like, help me get through this week, please. Like, I don't need overcomer. No, that's way too hard. That's way too much. There's no way that's happening. I'm just trying to survive right now. Like, overcomer, that's too much. But that's what I became. I became an overcomer of my fears. And to be honest, the whole piece of using my pain to help other people, that's what embraces. That's what my hope is. When I was that person who was just searching for somebody to tell me that it was possible. If you don't hear anything else in the rest of this podcast, if you don't hear anything else the rest of this episode, if you are in that spot or you have been in that spot, I can now be that person who looks at you and says, it's possible. You can overcome what you think you can't overcome. It happened to me. It can happen for you. And embrace all of this, all the stuff that we want to talk about. Like, I want to help you. I want to help you reframe how you think about things. I want to teach you some of the stuff that I learned along the way. And honestly, I want to listen to you. I want to hear what people are struggling with. And I want Embrace to be a community where we can help each other, where we can empower each other, where when you are having a tough day, you have somebody else who you can look at who can say, you can keep fighting. You can do this. It is possible. And the other piece is that, I want to help people who don't struggle with mental health issues. Like I said, I don't think I can explain how important it was that Brittany knew the right things to say and had the understanding of both mental health and abuse that she did that day, because she might have saved my life. And so that's the other piece of this, embrace. The goal, what we hope for, is that we can help everybody to understand this more. There are so many people who struggle with anxiety, who struggle with depression, who struggle with, all sorts of different things. And the more that everybody can have a better understanding of how to help each other in those situations, the more alleviation from suffering we can see. And mental health awareness and understanding is life-saving, and it is life-giving. And so, embrace is my heart and soul, because this has been my experience. Like, these are not things that I would say I've mastered. I still wouldn't say that I never experience anxiety or that I'm totally free from it, but I am so much stronger and in a place that I never thought I could get to. And I've got two fantastic co-hosts. I think both of them are planning on sharing their stories at different points too. But just the more people that we can get talking about this, and the more in depth and honest and real we can get, that's my heart and soul, is because I didn't go through what I went through just to go through something hard. I believe that I went through what I went through so that I can help other people who are hurting like I did. So I can be that voice that they need at that time to say, keep fighting. You can do this. You can be an overcomer too. So please, join us on this journey. Join our community and help us to help each other become overcomers.